Jordan, I feel like my face looks disgusting.
Yep, that's correct.
Here, I'll hold this next to, maybe this beauty of this camera will distract people from my disgusto face. Is it working?
Eh,
Welcome back, DP Review TV viewers. Chris Nichols here, and I've got a Nikon ZFC production model. I've talked about this camera a lot. It's mostly just how much I love the styling, but thanks to the camera store, we now have a production model to play with. We did an early impressions video. We talked a lot about handling and features on that, so definitely check that out. Today, we're gonna focus more on the shooting experience and, just kind of elaborate on some of the findings we had earlier. Now, you can probably see, but it is crazy cold outside, about minus 24 Celsius. We've got visibility to maybe 300 yards, lots of snow. We're gonna at least try to have some fun, Canadian fun. Now, we normally start our videos talking about handling characteristics. We are going to do that, but a little bit different today because we covered a lot of that as far as the dials, the buttons, control structure in our first video. I don't want to retread that ground, but also it's freezing cold today and I'm wearing big mitts and gloves. And so I've actually been using the camera that way. Not ideal, but actually the protruding dials on the ZFC are actually quite easy to manipulate. I like that. Even the control dials that are in the front and back of the camera still stick out enough that I can get to them quite easily with mitts and gloves on. So I'm actually pleasantly surprised by that. I also really like having all the manual dials with the numbers right on them because I don't have to turn on the camera waste battery power to see what my settings are. Now, the only exception to that is the aperture. It's displayed on a small LCD panel on top of the camera, and unfortunately it's turned off when the camera's turned off. I wish it was on, just like a lot of Fujifilm cameras do, so again, in a glance, I could get all my information. Now, I promise I'm not going to go off on how much I love the styling of this camera. I think that's evident. Build quality, though, I think it's appropriate for the price point here. It is actually mostly metal construction. It's magnesium construction in the body. One thing, though, I will say, the leatherette is plastic. It doesn't exactly feel super high quality, but I don't mind it. The battery door, though, is kind of cheap feeling. It does have a fairly good latch system, totally useless with mitts on, though. But under there, I've got a battery which only gives about 300 shots SEPA rated. That's not bad, but it's not great either. And then I've got one single SD card slot, which I really wish was UHS 2 instead of UHS 1. That being said, actually, even though it's UHS 1 card slot with a good card in there, you actually get quite a decent buffer on the ZFC. So I did a test here shooting 12-bit RAW, 11 frames per second, nice and fast, that's its maximum. And I was getting about 50 shots before it slowed down. It's actually quite impressive. And then when going to 14-bit, my frame rate drops to 9 shots per second, but I still got 40 pictures RAW only. I mean, a camera at this price point, that's actually pretty decent. Now, our light's actually quite beautiful today. I mean, very stark, lots of hoarfrost, but it's limited what kind of variety we can get for shots today. So, it's not a great test of the camera, but the ZFC is using the exact same sensor as the Nikon Z50, just over 20 megapixels. It's a known commodity, and we have lab tested this, so there's plenty of sample photos that you can download and check out that will have, summertime look and beautiful colors and things like that. Today, though, I guess I'm just going to focus on contrast. Everybody's going to say, like, oh, Chris, you shot the whole gallery black and white mode, but I could shoot it in vivid. It's not going to make any difference here today. Now, as far as exposure goes, this has very decent ISO performance for an APS-C sensor, and it's an ISO invariant sensor. I mean, if I'm shooting RAW, that basically means I could just protect my highlights and keep my ISO low at 100. And even though my darker areas and shadows might look too dark visually, I can go into RAW, boost them up, and they'll come up beautifully, and I won't get any more noise than had I just shot at a higher ISO in the first place, but my highlights will look good. I'm not going to need that on a day like today. We've got pretty fixed lighting, not a lot of contrast, it's pretty flat, but I will say that I'm going to just let the camera go on auto ISO today, do its thing. I'm going to try to keep my shutter speeds fairly slow. Nothing's really moving. Everything is frozen solid and about to die. And I'm definitely keeping my exposure comp like +1 today fixed. So we stopped to take a picture of this ice formation here, and Jordan very optimistically says to him it looks like a heart, whereas I first look at it and think that's a sperm, that's a spermatozoa. So I guess that really is the drive behind our personalities. Now, as I've talked about earlier, I love all the dials on this camera. I mean, that's one of its main selling features, and they're really designed quite well. But I do have one issue with the ISO dial, and that's that there's no option for auto ISO on the dial. And I really think that's bad because I want a quick way to set that. I use it often, and unfortunately with the ZFC, like many of the other Nikon mirrorless cameras, you can't customize a button to do auto ISO as an option, and you can't customize anything in the I menu for ISO either. So that means I'm either going into the menu to find the ISO setting buried in there and then set my auto ISO on and off, or I can choose a custom button to be the top of my menu and make sure that that's my ISO setting. So that's a pretty common workaround. But the other problem is this: when I do click over to auto ISO on this camera, unfortunately, whatever the number is set on the dial, that becomes the lowest minimum that the camera will use. So let me illustrate this because it's kind of annoying. Let's say I've got the camera set to 400 ISO because I'm just doing some manual shooting around, and then I decide, oh, now I want to go to auto ISO. Well, throw the camera to auto ISO on a bright sunny day, it's not going to let it go below 400 ISO because that's what's set on the dial, which is ridiculous. I mean, if I've got lots of light, I want the camera to go to lower ISOs, get the best image quality possible. So keep in mind that's a little bit of an annoyance there, but at least the ZFC is pretty. These poor geese, you know, they landed a minute ago and they're already covered in snow and freezing. They're probably like, why the f didn't we leave south earlier when everybody else is going? You know, the great thing about being human is we can show facial expressions, whereas animals can't really, but I assure you, those are some sad, sad geese. All right, so low angle shots like this, it is actually nice to have that fully articulating screen. I like that I can also protect it by reversing it, and it does have leatherette matching on the back. It's a nice touch. And for the vlogging crowd, which this camera is actually somewhat aimed at, again, that's going to be a nice feature for video work and for doing selfies and things like that. Now for today, I'm primarily relying on the 16-50 DX VR kit lens, 3.5 to 6.3, so it's kind of slow at the long end. At least it's compact, but you don't have a lot of APS-C options for the APS-C Z mount cameras. So really my only options are I can use the FTZ adapter with DX SLR lenses, but then I'm still getting something that's bulky and, you know, extra parts. That's not ideal. Or if I want nice fast lenses, I can get the full frame Z mount lenses, but then they're overly bulky and expensive for what I actually need for this camera platform. And the lack of lenses and the fact that they really haven't fleshed out this system since the Z50's been out and now the ZFC means that this is the biggest knock against getting one of these cameras, but at least they're pretty. So on a day like today, we don't really have a lot of opportunity to test autofocus, but luckily that has already been done by the team in Seattle, and the results are good. I mean, you know, in the bike test, straight on subjects, of course, it did a really nice job tracking with a little bit of weaving back and forth. It had a pretty high hit rate. There's a couple misses there, but overall, the eye detect works very nice. It's a nice interface to use, and I would say in our experience compared to the Fujifilm cameras, although both perform very similarly, we actually would give the edge slightly to the ZFC.
Okay, so it's a nice toasty warm Jordan recording from inside on a Nikon ZFC to talk about how this camera stacks up for video. And I think if you're looking at it compared to a lot of the other Nikon mirrorless cameras in the same kind of price range, this makes the most sense. The Z50 doesn't have the fully articulating screen, but same kind of quality. And then if you jump up to the Z5 full frame camera, that sensor's really not built for video. And I think, again, the ZFC is a better choice there. Where things get a little bit interesting is when you compare it to the Fujifilm lineup. They've done an excellent job with video. And if you're really confident with your video work, I do think the Fujifilm cameras are going to make a little bit more sense. They have log recording, they can output 10-bit externally. There's just quite a bit more room to grow with those cameras. However, I would say that the ZFC flat profile is very, very easy to grade, and I actually found the video autofocus on the Nikon is just quite a bit more consistent than the Fujifilm. So if you're looking for a really simple video camera, then the ZFC is going to check a lot of boxes. I just don't think it's something that you're going to use as like a primary video camera if you're really serious about video.
Okay, so first off, I'm surprised how well the ZFC held up in the cold weather. It actually did a really nice job. And overall, it's a fun camera to use. It's dependable. It's pretty. I don't know if I've mentioned that yet. And it's a ton of fun as well. I think the problem is when you start looking at this compared to the obvious competitor, Fujifilm. I mean, on paper, the XS10 is roughly the same price, has a brighter kit lens, and then you get things like, you know, the IBIS, the in-body image stabilization, and a little bit faster shooting frame rates. But overall, I still think the ZFC could be a very nice option there, you know, regardless. The main problem is going to be the lack of lenses. I mean, that's where Fujifilm is really going to take over. Just the fact that you've got so many to choose from, excellent lenses, and with Nikon, I feel like, you know, they're just not really supporting the APS-C lens lineup in Z-mount properly. So my main takeaway, the thing I love most about the ZFC is the styling. But to give you context, it's not style without substance, quite the opposite. I mean, most people who use this camera not only find it beautiful to look at, but also really a nice handling camera as well for the most part. And so I think the main issue here is we've got a test bed that really needs to move into a full frame ZFC format. You know, Nikon have now developed a body, they've got a large mount on there, they could put a full frame sensor into it, you know, fix out and refine any sort of handling issues that the ZFC might have, and then really make a full frame version shine. I think that's where the appeal is. Should you go buy a ZFC? I think if you're okay with the limited line of lenses, you don't feel that you're going to need a lot of choices there, and you want a stylish, nice handling body that takes great photos, this could still absolutely be a good option for you. But I really do feel like unless they start supporting the lineup or third-party manufacturers jump on board to make APS-C lenses or something like that, I kind of got my fingers crossed for a full frame version. Anyways, like I said before, if you look in the links just below my beard that's frozen completely, you will find dpreview.com sample galleries for the Nikon ZFC. Definitely take a look at those. Take a look at our photos here, especially you're in a beautiful warm location right now and you just want to know, I wonder what snow and freezing cold would be like. Well, our photos will show that. Otherwise, please like and subscribe to the channel. Leave your comments below. And as always, thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully next week it'll be warmer.